I'm Paul Mazourek, Whyalla Maritime Museum Curator, and I'm just standing at the former Whyalla Shipyards. Whyalla Shipyards started in 1939 and the whole shipbuilding business finished in 1978. After 1978, there was supposed to be a crisis within the steel industry and affecting the city as well. So was that notion correct? So this is the story of the Whyalla in the 1980s. After the shipyards, Whyalla in the 1980s. I'm Paul Mazourek, and this is a presentation for the South Australia's History Festival 2024. When the BHP Whyalla Shipyards closed permanently in 1978, it led to an exodus of some of the skilled workers and their families. As Whyalla was built around the heavy industries, the whole story of the city has been described as being continually in decline since. Was that notion correct? Whyalla in the 1980. A 7-year contract valued at more than $7 million was awarded to Whyalla-based Transfield Proprietary Limited for work at the new Port Augusta power station in January. 4 Indo-Chinese refugee families of 15 adults and children settled in Whyalla in February. BHP spent $38 million on relining the Whyalla blast furnace. Judith Fraser of Whyalla became BHP's first female fitter and turner employed by the company. BHP Whyalla took on 250 plus apprentices and trainees. The Australian newspaper editorial compared Whyalla to Siberia. The article angered the mayor, who invited the journalist to visit the city. He did in August, apologized, and wrote a completely different article. Transportable houses for Lee Creek were constructed in Whyalla in August. The federal opposition leader Bill Hayden, when visiting Whyalla, promised 1,000 jobs for the Iron Triangle if the ALP was elected. Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser was heckled by Labour supporters at an election meeting in the city. At a later dinner, he said that enthusiasm and a sense of purpose was evident in Whyalla. A 6% increase in weekly wages for BHP employees was announced in October. Shadow Minister for Minerals and Energy, Paul Keating, visited Whyalla in October. State Leader of the Opposition, John Bannon, visited Whyalla in October. Credit union market research revealed that most residents describe their city as pleasant, likeable, and excellent for living. 1981. Santos Proprietary Limited announced construction of a $150 million deep seaport and petroleum refinery at Stony Point at Point Lowly. SAALP officially supported the Santos project, but member for Whyalla, Max Brown, received a petition signed by 1,000 Whyalla residents opposing the selected site at Point Lowly. The 200,000th visitor to the BHP Whyalla Steelworks passed through its visitor reception centre in February. The closure of the Whyalla Shipyards was linked to the Australian Bureau of Statistics Migration Survey, stating that almost 7,000 people left South Australia in 1979 to 1980. Member for Whyalla Max Brown said that Whyalla's population improved and became static due to the influx of underprivileged people. The State Clothing Corporation factory in Whyalla became a revenue earner for the SA government in April. BHP committed to spending $50 million on capital works at the Whyalla Steelworks. A migrant resource centre was established in Whyalla. A locally unprecedented 4 women councillors were voted to the Whyalla City Council in October. Federal ALP Member of Parliament Bob Hawke delivered a keynote address to the audience of 400 at the Western Hotel in October, stating that an alternative lifestyle may ease job demand. Marsha Hines performed at the Western Hotel on 29 October. BHP Whyalla sacked 20 striking employees in November. 1982. In January, work started on Santos' 659-kilometer trench for the pipeline between Moomba and Point Lowly at the rate of 5 kilometers a day. BHP Whyalla produced and delivered all the steel, 1,200 tons in 24 meters length, for the construction of the Santos loading jetty at Port Bonaitan. A $2.3 million theatre was approved for Whyalla by the SA government in January. Federal leader of the opposition, Bill Hayden, visited Whyalla in April, promising that ALP would protect the local steel industry against international dumping prices. New ANZ Bank building was planned and constructed at the corner of Forsyth Street and Farrell Street. BHP's Whyalla's $40 million rail plant was opened by BHP Chairman Sir James McNeill and South Australian Premier David Tonkin in June. The expenditure of the Whyalla and District Hospital continuing redevelopment past $17 million. The mayor and councillors were outraged by the National Times newspaper article that described Whyalla as a dejected, grubby town. 340 jobs were lost as BHP cut shifts at the Whyalla plant. New model Mitsubishi Colt car, made specifically from BHP Whyalla steel products, went on sale on 18 October. On 22nd October, 200 angry demonstrators, mainly union members, greeted Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser at the Whyalla airport, chanting, "We want jobs." Brawling and fighting with police ensued, leading to arrests. 1983. Work on loading the very first shipment of product from Santos, Port Bonaitan, onto a Whyalla-built ship Selana in January was delayed by a couple of weeks due to a local industrial dispute over manning the wharf. At $750,000 expansion of the Flinders Avenue supermarket started in February, turning it into one of the biggest supermarkets outside the Adelaide metropolitan area. SA Senator Ron Elstock, leading candidate on the ALP's Senate ticket, promised to rebuild shipyards during his February visit to Whyalla. "It is good to be back among my friends," said federal opposition leader Bob Hawke to cheers and applause of more than 600 people at the Western Hotel in February. In April, it was reported that consumer spending of residents increased, but mainly due to the record intake of bank loans. An $800,000 upgrade of paramedical facilities at the Whyalla Hospital started in May. Deputy Leader and Shadow Treasurer of the Federal Liberal Party, John Howard, visited Whyalla in July. A $3 million Saudi Arabia contract for BHP Whyalla iron ore started to be loaded in Whyalla in September. The first international export of condensate from Santos, Port Bonaitan, was shipped to New Zealand in September. A large number of unemployed men, desperate for work, took to queuing outside the Commonwealth Employment Service before 5 a.m. on 4th October, which was described in the press as shades of the 1930s. In November, Whyalla CES office reported a drop of nearly 10% in the number of unemployed seeking work. 1984. Whyalla tertiary institutions expected about 3,400 students in the first term in 1984. The Institute of Technology, 400, and TAFE approximately 3,000 students. According to Mr. Brian Wall, the retiring community welfare officer, comments in February, in the 1970s, Whyalla had a fairly itinerant population with people coming and going all of the time, while in the 1980s it became more settled and a family town. Major British hard rock band Uriah Heep performed at the Western Hotel. The former HMAS Whyalla, the first ship built in Whyalla and purchased by the council in 1983, arrived from Victoria in May. SA Premier John Bannon announced $1.8 million funding for the foreshore development. In June, Santos Port Bonaitan plant first produced liquid petroleum gas. Retiring BHP chairman Sir James McNeill planted a symbolic tree at his last official visit to Whyalla in June. It celebrated a long-term beautification of the city when BHP garden staff planted hundreds of trees in Whyalla between the 1940s and 1980s. A Whyalla Credit Union survey showed 84.9% of residents are totally satisfied with life in Whyalla. BHP commissioned a report into the development of the new Iron Duke Iron Duchess mines, including the extension of tramway line from Iron Barron in November. 1985. Since the closure of the BHP shipyards in 1978, a local Spencer engineering firm built 8 vessels at their premises near the yacht club. The last one, finished in March, $600,000, 20-meter, 155-ton Ngari, was built for the Department of Fisheries. Wife of South Australian Premier Angela Bannon launched the vessel in Whyalla on 17 May. New Billbeck Range Theatre Complex at Nicholson Avenue opened on 9th March. Victorian company Betadine established a plant near BHP Whyalla's Salt Lakes in March, extracting a vitamin supplement destined mainly for the export. On 14 April, more than 2,000 Whyalla school children and residents greeted the Chinese Communist Party Secretary Hu Yaobang and Prime Minister Bob Hawke at the airport. Chinese and federal government delegations then visited the BHP Whyalla steel plant. BHP stated that China had been a significant trade partner since the early 1960s. Olympic gold medalist Lisa Curry visited all 3 Whyalla high schools, talking and promoting active swimming to the students between 22nd and 23rd April. According to the Aboriginal Community Centre, the Aboriginal population in Whyalla increased. The SA government announced plans in May to build a new children's centre at Booth Street that would primarily care for Aboriginal children. The Governor of South Australia, Sir Donald Dunstan, officially opened the 30-bed Yeltana nursing home on 18 June. In July, according to the Whyalla Tourist and Promotion Officer Phil Stone, the Whyalla tourism was worth $10 million to the city. In August, BHP announced a $250,000 major upgrade of Hammock Hill, including tree planting and recreation of World War II gun placements as a gift to the city. The biggest Santos export order of 32,000 tons of condensate LPG left Port Bonaitan for Japan in August. In September, BHP announced that they donated land and buildings, which was Tandira Recreation Hall and BHP Hostel office buildings, towards the new council's $1 million Maritime Museum, former HMAS Whyalla Ship and Visitor Center precinct near Lincoln Highway. Construction work on the foreshore cafe and surf life-saving building concluded. Whyalla had high unemployment, but it was not facing a catastrophe like the Brixton and Birmingham riots. Stated by a visiting UK expert in economics and employment, London-based Mr. Colin Ball. SA Premier John Bannon and his family attended Whyalla International Food and Wine Fair in October. On 19 November, Marine and Harbours Minister Roy Abbott opened a Marine and Harbours Department building at Port Bonnyton and commemorated the loading of the 100th ship for Santos. On 22 November, Federal Social Security Minister Brian Howe, Senator Nick Bolkus and SA Premier John Bannon attended the Whyalla ALP Christmas function at Trade Hall. A Steel Region Assistance Program grant worth $2 million was granted to Whyalla for the new marina construction and improvement of swimming areas at the foreshore. 1986. Queen Elizabeth II and the Duke of Edinburgh were welcomed to the city on 12 March, and the Queen spoke of the progress Whyalla made since her last visit in 1954 and commended the faith shown in the city by its citizens and state and federal governments. The new Youth Access Centre, the only one in regional SA, opened in March. National Australia Bank constructed a new building for its Whyalla branch at Forsyth Street after continually serving the city since the 1940s. In April, the former SA Premier Don Dunstan and SA Premier John Bannon attended the Whyalla ALP dinner to honour the retiring Member of Parliament Max Brown, member for Whyalla. The first shipment of steel to Iran left BHP Whyalla in May. It was reported that in May, a house at Jenkins Avenue was sold at auction for a record price of $140,000. The very first local full-color digital photocopier was installed at electrical discounters in Whyalla. 10,600 tons of steel were exported to the United States of America from BHP Whyalla in June. In September, the world's biggest LPG tanker, Esso Westernport, docked at Santos Port Bonnyton. Prime Minister Bob Hawke visited the city on 30th October. At least 12 new businesses were established in the city by the end of the year. 1987. BHP spent $14 million on improving the Whyalla blast furnace and a further $4 million on the redevelopment of a computer-based commercial system there. BHP Whyalla completed large export contracts of its steel products to South Korea, Malaysia and Canada. Mr. Con Fountain of the SA Council Social Services believed that Whyalla's image as a welfare dumping ground was a media propaganda thing. In May, a group of 110 locals left Whyalla for a holiday in London, UK. The travellers boarded the NZ 737 jet, which was specifically brought to the Whyalla airport for the occasion. The lead singer of Midnight Oil, Peter Garrett, made a surprise visit to Whyalla Sidetrack Youth Centre in May. Santos at Port Bonnyton secured a 3-year contract for LPG export to Japan valued at $100 million. Whyalla population was at 27,102 which was some 3,000 less than 30,518 in 1981. The city continued to be the largest regional center in SA. Historically, Whyalla's population reached its peak of 33,950 in 1977. In August, 10,000 tons of rocks were blasted off Hamming Hill for the Marina project. The blasting continued for another 3 months. BHP Whyalla's workforce dropped from 6,000 employees in 1983 to 3,930 in 1987. Southern Cross replica aircraft landed at the Whyalla airport in September. Sir Mark Oliphant presided over the graduation of 50 nurses from the Whyalla Hospital in October. The event held at the College Theatre was attended by 150 people. A work experience UK student of Housing Administration Studies at the Sheffield Polytechnic, working with the Whyalla SA Housing Trust, reported that unlike in Britain, people here were better off, they were better housed, and they actually got housing. In December, the BHP Long Product Division Whyalla blast furnace set a new world record for output from a furnace lining using a high percentage of pellet feed. 1988. The Australian Bicentennial Exhibition arrived in Whyalla on 3rd March as one of only 34 centres in Australia selected for the official visits. On 24th April, the Whyalla foreshore resembled a scene out of a war movie as hundreds of soldiers and vehicles made an amphibious invasion of the city. About 2,000 residents watched the 10th Terminal Regiment in action. Whyalla's own Northwest Airline started operations in July, providing flights to Adelaide and return. Whyalla City Council approved $100,000 for tourism promotion in the budget. A $30,000 sound shell was built in the Civic Park as the BHP Whyalla's own bicentennial project for the city. BHP announced a $40 million development of iron ore deposits in the Middleback Ranges. Mandy Scriven, a 70-year-old student from Edward John Eyre High School, finished 7th at the Santiago World BMX Championship. Mayor Aileen Ekblom opened the new Whyalla Maritime Museum complex on 29th October. Qantas' newest aircraft was christened City of Whyalla. 1989. Housing boom hit Whyalla as local banks approved a record number of home loans. Kendal Airlines' new aircraft was named City of Whyalla in a special ceremony. Whyalla was voted one of the best places to live in Australia. A 1989 Sydney newspaper survey placed Whyalla close second to Toowoomba in Queensland. BHP Whyalla dumped more chemical waste into SA waters than anyone else, according to the SA Government Environmental Report. Prime Minister Bob Hawke visited the city on the 20th September, and resident Bob Bell became hot media property when the PM called him a silly old bugger. To put into perspective the 1980s in Whyalla and the whole Australia. This is Australia in the 1980s. Historically, the Australian unemployment between 1950 and 1974 was at 2%. Australia was hit by the early 1980s recession, but the whole decade recorded an average of 9% unemployment nationwide and a GDP growth of 2%. A huge size of Olympic Dam copper, uranium and gold deposits were revealed in 1982. Floating of Australian dollars started in 1983. The Australian Securities Exchange was formed in April 1987. Over the period of 1983 to 1993, BHP steel productivity grew at an annual compound rate of 9.5%. Towards the end of the decade, the economy was at the top of the biggest boom in 15 years. So this is the story of Whyalla in the 1980s.